What we're going to start off with is a really, really good friend of mine, somebody who is passionately committed to our city, somebody that I believe devotes himself tirelessly. I've rarely seen somebody with so much energy, so much passion, so much emotion for making our city the greatest city on earth. I think he has done a phenomenal job in his time in his role. He has been the head of the Canadian Football League. He was the CEO of Rogers. He ran for political office provincially, and now he's the mayor of our city. I would tell you that you will never find, or rarely will you find, somebody more passionately committed to making this city truly the greatest place for us to live on earth. And I truly believe that there has been a transformation from what our city looked like and was like to live in 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and now. And I would say that it's because of John's leadership and his team that we are in a much better place today. So, without any further ado, the Mayor of Toronto, John Tory.
That's very kind, Joe. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. I normally have the good sense when I come to these kinds of programs to check the program very carefully. So if there's any beyond debating, delighting, and debunking, if there's any dancing involved, I generally arrive late and say my busy schedule didn't allow me to participate in that kind. Some of the organizations, like if you go to Salsa in St. Clair, I don't know how many of you have been to that in Toronto. I know there are people from out of town. You should come back and go to Salsa in St. Clair and spend a lot of money while you're here. But each year they delight in bringing me up on the stage and showing me how to dance salsa, knowing that each year will be an epic failure just like the one year before, and then they replay it over and over again on television for weeks. But I figure if that's how you can amuse people, then, go ahead. I am happy to be here. I'm standing on this circle. You should know that they've told us that if you step off this circle, a terrible electric shock will sort of befall you and you'll fall over, and that would be sort of embarrassing. So I'm going to just stand here on the circle as I've been instructed to do. But I am happy to be here. I had the same joy in my life before I was elected to office to be very involved, I think as some of you know, in the community work. And it was the greatest joy in my life. I tell young people that each and every day that I go about my job as mayor, because I think that of all the things they can do, I always urge them to work hard in school. But I urge them as well to start volunteering, and you're never too young, and because it's enriched my life so much, and I hope that it has made a contribution to the community at the same time. And I know this is a complicated audience that I'm addressing here, and I'll try and address my remarks to everybody that's involved and make sure that it's relevant to everybody that's here. And I say a complicated audience because it consists of people who are in, I think, three groups. There are givers who are here, people who give money and support causes. There are receivers, lots of those, who receive the money and put it to good purposes. And there are the raisers. And I think that's an important group too, raisers meaning the people who actually go out and raise money, sometimes volunteers, sometimes professional. And I like to think that in my own case that with Barb, my wife, that we've qualified to be a part of all three groups, that we have tried to set an example for the community, but also more so for our children. I'm a believer, by the way, that volunteerism, and you all know this because you either are volunteers or work with them, it comes from example largely set in families. But I like to think that we have been examples as donors and as volunteers. I also have been described before as a serial fundraiser because in the day when I was allowed to do that, you're not when you're in public life for obvious reasons. I sort of was involved in many, many different fundraising campaigns, and I've been involved on the board of enough of these kind of community and charitable organizations to know what it's about to be the trustee that in fact receives that money and puts it to good work. And, I know that, and in my case, I had 25 years on the St. Mike's Hospital Foundation. I was on the United Way Board and many, many other boards like that. And my main message for today is to say to all three groups, and this is the part that may be a bit provocative because I think that we get settled in. I know from my own experience, unless things have changed in the last 3 years dramatically, that we get settled into a way of doing things. And I think that if you look at the challenge that is facing the city, and many of us operate, I realize there are people here from Halton and from Calgary and other places, and from York region, that if you look at urban areas today, look at cities today, there are particular challenges facing those cities that we have to address, and I'm not sure the way we're going about the sort of the raising, the receiving, and the giving is necessarily making sure that the help gets to where it needs to be. And I think I'm going to ask you today to consider the city in a broader context and to broaden out your thinking with respect to how you do business, most of you, and I think it's applicable to other cities and other city regions across Canada, as to a place in which we not only can we make the most difference, but we have to. Because you're going to see from some maps that I show later on, and this is not brand new, but I think it needs to be repeated over and over again, that some of the challenges we face that really take away from us necessarily remaining forever as one of the best places in the world in which to live. They pose a threat, to be honest about it, that we have to address those in a more proactive kind of way. I don't take away for a minute from the work that you do and the causes and the institutions that you represent and how it's done. So the suggestion I'm going to make about broadening out our horizons and thinking a little outside the box and getting ourselves perhaps out of the sort of more centralized model that we've had over time, I think is just something that I think can make us even better. I have no doubt, for example, that if there's a cure found for cancer or for diabetes or a whole host of other things that are addressed by people in this building and in this room, it's going to be accomplished by the people that you work with and the people that you represent. But without diminishing the importance of that work, you have to ask yourself sometimes, what is the direct relevance? What is the direct relevance of that work to a teenager in Rexdale, which is, for those from out of town, northwest and somewhat disadvantaged part of our city, or to a senior, a frail senior in Scarborough? And the fact of the matter is that are we spending enough time ensuring that what we're doing, the efforts we're undertaking, whether it's in research or whether it's in culture or whether it's in other aspects of healthcare and education, are making sure that those efforts have an impact where it is most needed if we're going to make sure we build a strong, cohesive community going forward. And I think that the cities as a whole, taken as a whole, are the places across Canada, but I'll talk about this city, where we can best measure that impact and where it's needed. I know the answer isn't that we should shift all of our resources to some community base and sort of forget about the institutions which provide excellent research and care for people. I'm merely suggesting we have the balance wrong, and that in Toronto, at least, we have to start to look at the broader urban context as to how we can initiate the greatest benefits to the greatest number, including those in particular who need help the most. Because we focus on causes and institutions sometimes and not the city, and I think we are seeing resources consolidated. If you just look at how many of the organizations represented in this room are in the downtown context, I think it suggests to us maybe a bit of a need for a course correction to make sure that somehow, and this is where ingenuity comes in, that somehow we're making sure that that impact is felt in all parts of the city outside of the downtown. And that is, I think, also going to be in the best interests of ensuring the reputation of the institutions and the causes that you represent, which are often better known to a relatively small circle of people. I won't call them downtown people. I think you know what I mean, though, in terms of sometimes the narrowness with which those institutions and causes are known. And so I think that we have to start looking beyond the four walls of the places that you're involved with and beyond the confines of downtown, and look even at your own clientele, who may be numerous but not necessarily diverse and representative of a city that is the most diverse city in the world. And that poses, that's a blessing for us. We all know what a blessing it's been. Even nowadays, as we seek to compete for investment from around the world, the diversity and depth of our talent pool is something that's an immense advantage to us. But that diversity also poses some very particular challenges, because every one of those groups of people who've come, more than half the people who are living here were born outside the country, have had a different life experience, and that shapes their own thinking, as it would for any of us, and poses more of a challenge for those of us who are involved in the different kinds of institutions. And so I think that the Canadian values that we share have made us good at embracing and celebrating the differences of people that have come from elsewhere, but I think we've done less well at making sure that those people in all of their diversity are served in an equitable manner, so they all have access to the very best that we have to offer. And so to me, it means that we don't always reach out and have that active presence that we need to have in all parts of the city, in all communities, and with all different groups of people, some that are going to find it more easy to gain access to what we have to offer than others. And it means that I think we have to decide collectively we're going to step outside, and it includes government, by the way, step outside of that centralization box, as I call it, the instinct we all have to sort of be more comfortable at home, to be more comfortable where we've been, to be more comfortable doing things the way we've always done them, and to understand that I think we could better deliver supports and services in a more impactful manner across the city as a whole, to make sure we reach not just a broader cross-section of the population, but to reach the people who often need the help the most, who often are the ones that don't have the easiest time receiving it. You know, it's interesting because I was just talking to the city councillor who sits next to me last night as we finished the budget late last night for this year. And we were remarking on the fact, and I think many of you will know this is true, there are people in this city for whom downtown is almost a foreign concept. They never come downtown. They never go downtown. They don't really think about going downtown. They can't afford sometimes to go downtown. It's a hard concept to think about that, but they can't. And as a result, that must mean by definition, with the excellence of a lot of things that are existent downtown, that they don't necessarily have any access to that, whether it is culture, whether it is education, or whether it is, for example, healthcare. So I think it's going to involve some change in thinking. So if you start with donors, for example, the givers that I referred to, and in the end, don't they really call the shots? I mean, because in the end, you know, you're going to be, to some extent, dancing to the tune of the donors. They might actually have to start to change their way of thinking by insisting, because you know, if a donor insisted and said, no, I want you to do something in another part of the city to try and broaden out the reach and the impact of this organization, that the chances are you'd probably respond to that, because you know, you are going to be responsive to what the donors have, and they are going to have to ask themselves whether there aren't opportunities for them to make their dollars have a bigger impact by doing something that is outside of that comfortable, more centralized surrounding that we're all accustomed to. You know, the United Way, as a receiver, has been at the forefront of doing this for quite a few years now with the establishment of the community hubs. And what were those? I mean, yes, they made sense in the sense that they were a place where a bunch of services were delivered together, but what they really did was make sure people had access to those services at all. And you can blame the government, including the one that I'm now privileged to lead here in the city, for the fact that over time we haven't found a way to deliver these services. But in many cases, the services are delivered by agencies, and the United Way had the community hub to bring them together in one building. And it not only made sure that those services were delivered to those people in a more centralized way, but that they had access to those services at all. But the trouble is, I forget how many there are now funded. There might be 9 or 10. That means that there are 9 or 10 in this great big huge city that are having advantages from that more centralized, but at the same time more decentralized delivery of services. But it goes beyond that. I mean, I think that that what we have to do is ask ourselves what else we can do to build upon that model. It relies on the receivers of the money to make the conscious decision, as hard as it might be. I was talking to Judith John who works with the Royal Ontario Museum, and they have a program that takes the museum out to school children and out to neighborhoods where they might otherwise not have access to the museum. And I think we have to start to think about, in areas like delivery of healthcare and even delivery of education, how can we take the delivery of what we do, take the best we have to offer, and make sure that we reach out into those communities. You know, I'm about to do that with some job fairs that I'm going to oversee this year, because we all know that nowadays it's great to be able to have the technology to send your resume in by through the internet. But we also know that it's easy to ignore resumes that come in through the internet, and that it doesn't really give you an opportunity to show your stuff. Half the people never hear back anything, and the other half don't really ever get a chance to show who they are and what they can be. Whereas when you have a job fair and somebody's sitting right across the table from you, the experience has shown that a lot of those people get hired, whereas they wouldn't by electronic means. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about taking the best we have to offer in terms of supports and services and the work that is done by organizations like this out across the city. I want to show you, I mean, there's the idyllic, picture of Toronto and how it looks, and that's the picture that people see on postcards and, in around the world. And they know of how we live here, and by the way, they admire it. My talk is not meant to talk down how we're doing. We're doing among the best in the world when it comes to creating a quality of life and supporting people in their ambitions, and most particularly in embracing people for who they are and what they are, regardless of their race or their color of skin or their sexual orientation or their faith. But we have a lot of work to do, and some of the maps I'm going to show you kind of illustrate that. And you've seen the maps before, but I think they're worthy of looking at again. This one is one that looks at income disparity. And I'm now going to have to take the risk of almost stepping off because of my eyesight. But this is growing income disparity. And you'll see on every one of these maps, without exception, a bit of a shape in the city where there's a downtown kind of core, a midsection of the city that is more comfortable when it comes to each of these different things I'm going to illustrate. But then there's kind of a horseshoe around the city. They often describe it as an upside down U or a right side up U. You can see here, this is the percentages of visible minorities. And the reason I put that up, and you're going to see another one that has to do with crime, is that you will see that what goes with I believe, the inequitable distribution of the very best in terms of supports and services goes with other demographic characteristics and other kinds of events that happen in these parts of the city that I think, quite frankly, are the things that pose the threat, if I will put it that way, to making sure 25 years from now this is the most livable city in the world. When people ask me what is the most serious issue the city faces, you might think I would answer transit or housing, and I could. But those are both connected to what I think really is the biggest challenge facing the city, which is the challenge of making sure that we don't allow communities to grow more and more isolated and more disadvantaged on our watch here. And there is a gap that is growing between communities that I describe as comfortable and those who are struggling. There is one that has to do with, I'm going to have to step forward again, that's immigrant population. So again, look at the pattern that you can see of that U. There are shootings that took place, and again, it's a U that goes this way. But it's the same thing, and it shows you in the two extremities of the city, northwest and northeast, that we have people who are by and large more newcomers than not. We have people who are by and large, there is a high school graduation rates. Again, you can see the makings of the same pattern. And you can see the threat that pattern poses to the kind of city that I think we would believe we're trying to build and that is consistent with our values. There is playgrounds. Now you can see there again the actual yellow color there is a good thing, and that we've done a better job at having access to playgrounds, but there are lots of places in the city, again in those extremities, where they don't have as easy an access to playgrounds when it comes to kids. That is the same thing, playgrounds within a short distance. There is seniors. And again, if you put all these things together, seniors, visible minorities, newcomers, and so on, you will see, again, there's a pattern. And then I think the last one that's going to come up here is where young people are in the city. And this is the one that I would be most concerned about, because if you overlay all of these on top of one another, those young people, that again, you can see it's slightly harder to, but it doesn't take much to see the upside down U with that kind of gold color that's there that shows fairly heavy concentrations, with the two biggest concentrations of the youngest people in the northeast and the northwest again. And I would just say that again, that's the future. Those are the future people. Those are the people that are going to be the leaders and the entrepreneurs and the donors and the receivers and the volunteers going forward. And that those are the places where we have to invest. And yes, we have to invest as governments, and we're doing it. But I would argue that we need your partnership, and that's where civic philanthropy comes in. I mean, civic philanthropy is a concept that hasn't really, I think, caught on to a great extent yet, and that's not to take away from money or otherwise from what you're doing, but it is to say that we need to have partnerships. We need to partner now. I take the example of the Bentway, which is a concept that the Matthews family, I guess, came up with, Judy and Will Matthews. And where was the partnership, you might say, because they gave $25 million to create that park. Well, when they offered the $25 million and came to see me, they forced us to step up and say, we will finance and operate and keep going the park once they paid most of the cost of building it. And I'm saying to you, we have to start thinking of examples, whether you're a hospital, an educational institution, or other kinds of organizations that are represented in this room, of similar opportunities to go out into the community, to make sure that we're going out consistent with what those maps show the needs are, and finding ways to establish a presence and to make sure we take the best out to the people who may not find their way as easily to what we have to offer them in terms of all the rich resources that this city has in the context of healthcare or education or otherwise. What can we be doing that is outside of the downtown, in Scarborough, in Etobicoke, in that U, whether it's the upside down one or the one that's right side up? A lot of those parts of the city that you saw on those maps that have the greatest need, if you think about it for a minute, they have never seen a marquee investment by a big organization such as the ones represented in this room. A big presence where we said, you know what, we're going to do something different and establish ourselves here so that people can, almost within walking distance or a short bus ride, get to what it is that we have to offer to make sure they have the best, whether it's medical care or otherwise. And I'm just suggesting that, and by the way, I've been very clear in saying that I don't believe, and I've been told that if we try to convince people to engage in civic philanthropy to replace the government, it won't be successful. I'm not suggesting that. We have our role to play, and I am one who believes government is a force for good. But at the same time, I believe that you can find opportunities to partner with us and us with you in taking all that you have to offer, all of the ingenuity, all of the fabulous delivery of service capacity out to the people who need it the most. And I think that if we do that, we're going to find that we can make a bigger impact and make sure that we have a better guarantee of that quality of life going forward. I want to just make one final comment in the time, because I'm about to run out of time, and they didn't tell me what the consequences would be if the clock ran down to zero. You know, I know about the shock stepping off the carpet. And you notice even when I was trying to squint at the slides, I didn't step off the carpet because I was afraid of that. By the way, I think doing all this will involve a leap of faith for everybody involved. It'll involve a leap of faith for the raisers of money who traditionally find it easier to sort of say, well, look, you know what we have here, you know how to give, you know what the areas are to give, you know what the projects are. It'll take a leap of faith for donors who are more comfortable, quite frankly, knowing that if they've given money to a given hospital or a given gallery or a given museum, that they can go to that place and see what's happened with their money. And I think everybody's going to have to work a little harder to sell that project in Rexdale or that project in Malvern, in Scarborough, where people need the best of everything that we have to offer. But the final thing I want to say is this, and I'm going to take one extra minute, and good luck, they can get me off here in whatever way they want. Amanda, you can come up here and tackle me if you like, but you're going to get shocked, though, right on the... The most important thing beyond money, or, you know, I mean, I'm not saying money's not important. I mean, I spent many years of my life chairing fundraising campaigns, and I know the money is necessary to buy things and to hire the best people from around the world to come here and do things for us. But the most important thing we can do is engage more people. And I hope that one of the things that you will do, and I know sometimes we think, well, it's all about raising the money. And yes, in the context of these campaigns, it is. But you have the power as respected organizations that have impacted a lot of lives positively. You have the power to engage people, which I think is the only thing more important than money. I once was giving a speech in the area where I grew up, where I was privileged to grow up in North Toronto, and I was standing in a church probably talking to 300 people, and I bet you if I'd had a chance to go through and examine who they were architects and lawyers and teachers and doctors and all that sort of thing. And I said, you know, standing here, we are 3 miles from one of the neighborhoods in Toronto that we now politely call priority neighborhoods or neighborhood improvement areas, but they're areas of people who are struggling. They're struggling. And I said, if we took the 300 people in this room and all the talent and all the connections that they have and decided as one we were going to kind of walk over, because you could walk and it wouldn't take long, and apply all of the knowledge and the connections and the desire those people have to build a better city and applied that just even 10% of their time, we would do a lot to eradicate the disparities that exist on those maps that I saw. And I hope that you might decide that as part of this broadening your mandate over time, to think about engaging people. You engage people to give, we engage people to sometimes give small amounts, and that's terrific. But I think if we could engage them even more so than we do to give their time, to say we need you to actually go out into the community to some of those places that were illustrated on those maps to address some of the things that I think we would be proud to address within the context of our values, that would be a great service as well. And so it involves a slightly different way of thinking. I hope this has been remotely relevant. I so much admire the work that you do, because I spent so much of my time working with people in here who are by and large professionals, some volunteers, and it is so important. People are so professional, and they have contributed to the fact that we are the greatest city in the greatest country in the world. The only challenge that I would issue to you, as I issue to myself every morning when I get up, we cannot afford to be complacent about that. We have to make sure that our actions match our values, and that the real test is 25 years from today, when people are looking what I did when I had the chance, what you all do when you have the chance, will we still be regarded as one of the most livable cities in the world, where we can be proud that our values are in action each and every day? That's really the question. That's what I know you're doing, and I hope this has provoked a little bit of thinking that will help you to have a great day. Thank you very much.